Hi everyone, my name is Erica Robinson and I'm a National Tech Rep with Tamron USA. I'm excited to be here with you today to talk about Aperture. There are three important pieces to our exposure triangle: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. So we're going to break down Aperture in this video and then be sure to check out the other videos in this series to learn about the rest. First, it's important that we learn about our camera. On top of your DSLR, you will see M, S, A, and P, or some form of those things. A stands for aperture priority. So we are choosing the aperture and the camera is choosing our shutter to help consistently achieve the right exposure throughout our images. Now, aperture does two very important things. One, it helps us control how much light we are letting in through our lens onto our image sensor. And two, it helps us control our depth of field, whether we want a deep or a shallow depth of field. So if you are down at f2.8, f2, f1.4, those low numbers, you're actually opening up your lens and letting in more light into your camera. Whereas if you're at f16, f22, those higher numbers, you're letting in less light into your camera. So let's see a couple of examples with that. In this image was shot at f16 so that I could make sure to let in the correct amount of light for it being a really bright and sunny day. Had I gone to open up my lens a bit more, I would have overexposed my image possibly and blown out a lot of those highlights that are there in the background. Whereas in this image here, I needed a whole lot more light to hit my image sensor, so this image was shot at f2.8 to let in as much light as my lens possibly could through that hole inside of my lens. Now let's take a look at what the other thing that aperture does. So aperture helps control our depth of field, whether I want a shallow or a deep depth of field. So if I'm opening up my lens while I'm letting in a lot of light, I'm controlling my depth of field to be more shallow. So at f2.8, 2, 1.8, 1.4, those lower numbers, I will have a more shallow depth of field. But if I am up at f11, f16, f22, those higher numbers, I'm, as we talked about, letting in less light, and I'm also creating a more deep depth of field. So everything in my foreground to my background should be mostly in focus. So let's look at a couple of examples with that. When you're trying to create sort of a portrait of sorts, whether that's of an animal, like here, or a person, or whatever it may be, sometimes you want your subject to be the only main thing in focus, and everything else to kind of be disappeared almost, to be blurry. And that's what we call our bokeh effect, where our subject in the front here is in focus and everything behind it is not in focus. This image here was shot at f6.3, so that I could take advantage of a more shallow depth of field, as well as take advantage of the compression that my longer lens will offer me. This was shot with the 150 to 600 millimeter G2 lens. Whereas with this image, this was shot at f16 so that I could make sure the majority of my foreground and my background in my landscape stayed in focus. And then I shot about 3/4 of the way through the frame, again to make sure the most of my foreground and the most of my background stayed in focus. So let's look at that a little bit closer. I have a series of images here that I'm going to show you shot at different apertures throughout the series. In this way, you can kind of see in a close-up fashion how all of those focal planes change when we change our aperture and controlling our depth of field. This first image here was shot at 2.8, and we're going to go all the way through f22. Starting here at 2.8, this one here at 5.6, the next one at f8, the next one at f11, the next one at f16, and lastly at f22. So you can see more in a close-up fashion how your depth of field will change throughout the aperture range. This is where you can find me on social media. I am at Tamron Tech Erica on Facebook and Instagram. So if you have any further questions, just want to follow along on the journey or need some photo support, I'm certainly here to help. please search me out on Facebook and Instagram. I'm happy to support you there. For your homework, definitely practice. Practice makes perfect. So let's use all of these skills and hone them in now so that when we get into the real world, we can understand all of the pieces to our camera, so we're only worried about creating amazing images. And of course, follow along on the other videos in this series so that you can now perfect your shutter speed and your ISO and complete the exposure triangle. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I hope you are well, and I will catch you on the road sometime soon. Bye now.